Okay, I called to order the special board meeting for the Ridge-Niles School District number 64 for Monday, April 27th, 2020. Carol, can you call roll, please?
Pearl.
Here.
Sotos.
Here.
Biaggi.
Here.
Dallas here. Little.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Riles.
Here.
Everyone's present.
Great. At the conclusion of our last board meeting a week ago, we talked about potentially having a brief discussion on Dr. Olson's review, and primarily just for timing and logistics at this point. So we asked Dr. Martin to be here as well too. So if we're ready to do that, I'll entertain a motion to go into closed session under 2C1 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act.
So moved.
Press that motion.
Second.
Larry, Denise, did you have it first? Did
I only heard Larry.
You're on mute. That was why. So okay, Larry's got it. Okay.
I'll take roll. So Dallas, yes. Sotos.
Yes.
Pearl.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Riles.
Yes.
Little.
Yes.
Biaggi.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, the recording is beginning and we are in our special meeting for the District 64 Board of Education meeting.
Thanks, MJ. So the board is back from closed session. We adjourned, or we commenced our meeting at 6:30 this evening. We went into closed session shortly thereafter for one issue tonight to discuss the superintendent's review under section 2C1 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. And we just adjourned from closed a few moments ago and are back now into our public portion of our meeting. So with that, I'd like to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Larry, if you would lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, Larry. So tonight is a special meeting that we've scheduled. It was initially primarily just to discuss the continuum of services for special education, but as a result of some conversations we had at our last meeting, we extended over one agenda item from our previous meeting from last week. And in addition, in the meantime, we've since had a couple of what appear to be hiring decisions by administration on some administrators, and so we're going to take care of that business tonight as well during this meeting. So before we get there though, I know we have a couple of public comments that we've received already, although I think one of them may not be on an agenda item and at least one of them is. So Natasha, do you want to, actually before we do this, I'll just, because I've noticed we have a fair amount of attendees on tonight. And I just want to remind all of the attendees that are here watching us remotely that they can, even during the meeting, send in questions for the board. The email address for those questions is located on the district website, and Natasha is graciously fielding all of those for us during the meeting, and she'll be bringing them to the board's attention as we touch on each agenda item. But if you do have anything now on a non-agenda item that you haven't gotten in yet, we'll give you a couple minutes because we have at least one to read. And otherwise, we will take those comments during the parts of the meeting that relate to whatever topic you're bringing up this evening. So with that, Natasha, you want to read the one that you have?
Yes, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me first. Good, we're good? Okay, so I do have one non-agenda comment, and then we'll reserve the sped one for later. This is from Joan Sendrick, Park Ridge resident. District 64 taxpayers have spent a boatload of money on providing for what is supposed to pass for security in our schools. Why then do we continue to allow our schools to be used as polling places on election days? I have heard the argument that access is limited to a specific area of the schools and that voters cannot get into any other areas of the schools. I'm not buying it. What it does mean is that the students do not have access to a portion of the building that they should have, and for what we're paying in taxes to the district, that's unacceptable. What is also infuriating is that the district scheduled a day off for the students 1 week prior to election day this past March. Why couldn't that day off have been on election day so as to protect the students from potential harm if security is so important? A little common sense would be nice once in a while. It is time to tell the county election board that our schools are no longer available to them as polling places, and do it now while they have time to find alternative sites. Failing that, adjust the school calendar so that there are no students in the buildings on election day. Thank you. P.S. I just looked at the online school calendar for 2020-21, and it shows that there is no school scheduled from Monday, November 3rd, 2020. I would point out that November 3rd, 2020 is a Tuesday and is in fact election day, so something is amiss with your calendar. Is the Teacher Institute on Monday or Tuesday? Local elections will be held on Tuesday, April 6, 2021. There is a day off scheduled for parent-teacher conferences on Friday, April 2nd, 2021. How about an adjustment, or better still, no polling places in schools? That concludes the comment.
So I can certainly follow up with her to answer her questions and sort of address her concerns, and can certainly bring it back to the board if we need to.
So Eric, just a quick question, because I know this came up at the Park District a couple of years ago. It's not mandatory that the schools, as I recall, and James, you can jump in here if you know, but it's not mandatory that the schools serve as polling places. I mean, we've agreed to do that. And I recall, if I recall correctly, we can agree not to do that as well too.
Sort of. So the schools do not have to be polling places, but we don't have a choice in the matter. Every year we ask for them not to be in any of our schools, and every year they put them in all of our schools. So that is like an ongoing yearly thing. And I know many other districts fight against that, especially in the common age. So I know of some districts that have been successful in reducing the number, but not been able to eliminate it. So we will, you know, in all likelihood pursue that, you know, as we have each year.
Okay.
I think we can just quickly clarify on the calendar list view, Tuesday, November 3rd is listed as a Teacher Institute Day, no student attendance.
That is correct. We actually tried to find the error today and couldn't find it. So, you know, maybe Joan can point it out if she has a link, but yeah, it's posted correctly. It is Tuesday, November 3rd, no school.
And when I reach out to her, I can find out where she saw the error so that we can try to track that down.
Okay, and she's on, I see her name on the list of attendees right now. So Joan, if you're listening, you can feel free to, well, Dr. Olson's gonna reach out to you one way or the other, but if you wanna send in specifically where you saw that error, then we can get it addressed on the calendar.
Okay.
Great. Natasha, anything else in the interim that came in?
Not for now, so I'll have a public comment for later in down the agenda.
Okay, great. All right, do any of the board members have any changes, additions, deletions, amendments to the agenda as presented tonight? Okay, there are none, so we are going to move on to.
Oh, I just had a quick question about public
sure.
comment. Am I still timing it for 3 minutes for each person? Oh, right.
It's a good question. I don't know how we.
I mean, I could use a timer on my phone.
Sorry, Carol?
I could use a timer on my phone, I guess, and then let the person know if we have any live comments when they have a minute left, I guess, or 30 seconds.
Yeah, unless anyone wants to suspend.
Unless we just want to, suspend it, and that'll be easier.
Right. I don't think it's a bad idea to suspend the rules for written comments at this point, as long as they're not, I mean, if they're being read into the record, if it's, you know, if it's 6 pages long or something, we can agree not to read the whole thing into the record at that point and just, you know, disseminate it amongst the board and take it under advisement, if everyone's okay with that. Okay. All right. So we are moving on to, we've got 2 hires tonight that the board is going to take action on. So Eric, do you want to do the introductions for both of our candidates? Oh, you're on mute still. There you go.
Thank you. Yes, I would love to. So first we will start with our field principal. And ironically, we had 64 candidates for District 64. And all the candidates went through an extensive process. We are very happy to present Mrs. Courtney Goodman to you tonight. Courtney went through many rounds of interviews before being chosen as the finalist at the end. Also, our last interview involved board members, parents, and staff that all gave input on the final two candidates. Mrs. Goodman has been the principal at John Middleton Elementary School in Skokie School District 73.5 for the past 3 years. Prior to her current position, Mrs. Goodman served as the assistant principal at Oliver McCracken Middle School in District 73.5 for 4 years. We are very excited to welcome her to the district and know that her personality and leadership style will be a great fit for Field. Do you want me to go into both candidates back to back, or do you want to address the first one first?
Why don't we go candidate by candidate, and we can take a vote on each one and then spend time. So we've got a motion. I'll entertain a motion on this candidate.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the appointment of Courtney Goodman as Field Elementary School Principal effective July 1st, 2020, based on the recommendation of the superintendent and not upon the board's direct knowledge regarding the individual selected for appointment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Rebecca, that was you, had the second?
Yes.
Great. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion, any questions? I know Courtney's here tonight. Are there any questions for Dr. Olson or Mrs. Goodman or from the board, or any discussion amongst ourselves? I know Carol and Rebecca, you were both at on behalf of the board at the last interview, right?
Yes.
Great.
I'm very excited.
Cool. All right. Natasha, any comments from the public? None.
No comments.
Great. Okay. And I think we're ready for a vote.
Okay, Little,
Yes.
Sellis, yes. Riles,
Yes.
Biaggi,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great. Courtney, congratulations and welcome aboard.
Courtney, I've unmuted you.
Oh, there's. Oh. Nope, now I see someone else.
Wrong person.
Yep, wrong person. It's okay. All right, Eric, I think we're ready for you again.
All right. We also have an associate principal for Emerson Middle School to present to you tonight. We had 94 candidates apply for this position, and these candidates also went through several rounds, the last of which was involved with myself, other administrators, and members of the Emerson staff and parents. Altogether, it was a pretty easy selection for the group. They are all very excited to welcome Ms. Tessa Iosa to Emerson. Ms. Iosa has worked for the previous 2 years as an assistant principal at Genoa Kingston High School. Previous to that position, Ms. Iosa served as a dean of students for 3 years at 2 high schools and District U46. We're very excited to welcome her to Emerson. Thank you.
Great, we have a motion for Ms. Iosa as well, too.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the appointment of Tessa Iosa as Emerson Middle School Associate Principal effective July 1st, 2020, based on the recommendation of the superintendent and not upon the board's direct knowledge regarding the individual selected for appointment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Rebecca, if you got that one too, you beat Larry. All right, same question here. Any comments from the board? Carol or Rebecca, you were at this interview as well too? Oh, you were not.
No.
Okay.
It seems like her student behavior and discipline will be a good experience to bring to Emerson.
Yeah, which was, if everyone recalls, this was, what was it? Tom and Larry and Fred, was what, 3 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, that we created this position at Dr. Hines' request for specifically that purpose, to have a second hand over there with discipline and behavioral issues. So.
Right.
Great. Okay, Natasha, any comments from the public?
None.
Okay, last chance for the board. Okay,
Okay, Little,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Dallas, yes, Riles,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
Biagi,
yes,
motion carries.
great. Tessa, welcome aboard. Congratulations.
Did you want Tessa to join in the conversation?
Sure, if she's here. Hey, Tessa, you there?
I think so.
There you are. We
Thank
can-
you all so much. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to joining the team.
Great, we're excited that you're coming on board. Looking
Yes,
forward.
Welcome.
thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I also have Courtney Goodman, if you'd like for her
Sure.
to have a moment.
Yep. Hi, Courtney, I see your name there. Not sure if you can, oh, there you are. Can you hear us?
I can, yes.
Oh, there you
Hi, thank you all so much. I'm very much looking forward to joining and meeting all of you in person, hopefully sooner than later.
Us too.
Welcome.
Us
Thank
too.
you very
Thanks
much.
for- Thanks
Welcome.
for doing this virtually tonight. We appreciate it.
Gladly.
Great. And welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to one of the issues that was in our last board meeting regarding the transportation contracts. And if, as everyone recalls, we had a pretty lengthy and robust discussion of those contracts and the proposed amendments from the transportation company that had requested that we consider paying 50% of their payroll for their employees through, I believe it was the beginning of March, or at least when we went on shutdown through the end of the school year. And we had instructed our council to go back and to discuss some of those points with the transportation company, including trying to negotiate down the, I think it was 3.5 or 375 proposed increase to the contract for next year, as well as our concerns over the payroll issue and whether or not they'd entertain the idea of a potential credit back to us over the length of the upcoming term of the contract. So we have some, I guess, news that both Luann and James can present to the board tonight, in addition to what we have in our packet. Luann, you're on mute still. There you go.
So what I've come up with basically will end up not costing the district really anything, because if we were not paying them anything, we wouldn't be getting the reimbursement from the state. So what I looked at was the 100, okay, so let me back up. So I removed regular education from this equation because we only get $11,000 about in reimbursement for this. So I totally removed regular education to pay for student Lakeview at all. Then I looked at if we did 50% of the cost, what would our anticipated ISB reimbursement be? The lowest we've had in the last few years was 65.16%. So the total cost to the district would be $102,750. And I took away the increase for the regular education, and then I backed into the SPED one so that that negative number was close to zero. So that would be a 1.40% increase in their SPED contract for next year. And that the other parts of the contract remain the same. And then James, you can tell them the changes you made in the contract.
The contract, the amendment itself, let me back up too as well. So again, Luann had negotiations with the company, and to try and make this a zero-sum game, the fees that were being sought for regular education are no longer being sought. She focused on the special education component at 50%. Then based on that amount that would be paid and the reimbursement there, she then was able to get a 0% increase for the regular transportation services for next year. And again, I think it was 1.3% for special ed.
1.4.
1.4%.
1.4.
So if you net that all out, then it's a zero-sum gain to the district. With respect to the amendment remains largely the same, with the one exception of addressing Tom's issue to ensure that there was an aggregate profit to the company as a result of payments from other school districts and other type of vendors that the district would be entitled to a clawback. But otherwise, it remains substantially the same.
So just for the board's sake, and MJ, am I able to share before I hit the button? Do you know if I do it, I'll be able to share? Okay. Sorry, just trying to pull this up right now. Oh, you know what? I might not. I don't want to chance this. I've got a bunch of other stuff up on my screen right now. So I was going to pull up just the, Luann, maybe you could do it. Just, I've got 1.5 million tabs open on my screen, or MJ, just the matrix that's in the board report for this particular issue has the math on it. Would you be able to pull that up? It's RA4, and it's on page 3 of Luann's report.
Okay, give me a moment. I don't have access to that right at this point.
Oh, wait. You know what? Hold on. I think I can. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, never mind.
Perfect.
Sorry, MJ. I did have it. I was able to get it quickly. All right, so I just want to make sure everybody gets the math here of what we're talking about. And for the public's sake, because I know we have a lot more people on this call tonight than we did last week, but the discussion here is that the transportation company has asked us, initially it asked us to compensate them at a 50% level for their employees who would not otherwise be working during this shutdown from, roughly the beginning of March through the end of the school year. And so although we were also going to enter into a one-year renewal of the contract, they were asking us to amend that contract to include this additional compensation to their drivers who would otherwise be unemployed and would need to seek unemployment. So what they've asked us for here, again, is 50%. Again, there was a robust conversation at the last meeting, and the board was split on how to handle this, whether they want to do or not. And again, without going fully into all of the issues and rationale behind it, it looks like what we have now is a net zero to the district. So again, Luann, I'm just going to walk through one more time layman's terms. Tell me if I've got this wrong, but 294,920 is the 50% cost, but that's just special education, or that's everything?
That's just special education, Rick, for the 54 days we've been doing remote learning.
Okay. And so, again, so just so I'm clear, so they're not asking for the 50% for the gen ed drivers?
No,
or the other way around?
Right. I took it out of the equation because we get such a small reimbursement from the state, and the state really is the one that is asked or requested, or it's not a mandate, but they said if districts could do this, it would be helpful so that bus companies are ready to run when we go back to school.
Okay, so I guess that's what I'm not understanding. So there's a different number for gen ed, or there's not?
I took it out of the equation totally, Rick. So I'm looking at, because we could not get a net zero if I keep regular education in there without the district having to contribute, a considerable amount of money.
So we're saying we're not going to contribute on the gen ed. We're only going to contribute on special.
Correct.
Okay, just so
yes.
everybody's clear, that's what we're saying. There are no other numbers here at play. It's the 294.
That's correct. This is it.
is what we'd be writing a check for. Then we're going to get reimbursed 192, 170 from the state.
That's correct.
Which leads to a 102, 750 difference. And then they were originally coming to us with a 375 increase on special ed transportation.
Correct.
That has been moved down to a 1.4% increase. And on the gen ed transportation, it's 0. It's no longer.
That is correct.
So is the 103.13 number the combination of the money saved in gen ed and sped, or just the money saved from sped?
No, that's the combination of the two. And I, backed into the number then to get the 1.40, so it would be a net 0 gain.
Right.
Because initially last week we had talked about no increase on either, but then it would have looked like really weird because it would have been like a negative 22,000. So I backed into the number to get us as close to 0 as possible.
Okay. So let's start with the math on this first before we go into the other specifics in the contract. Does anybody have any questions on the math that was done? I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and go back to places. Anybody have questions on that math as Luann presented it? Okay. So now the contract, James, this is probably as much for you or more than it is for Luann. I know one of Tom's concerns last week was that the transportation company couldn't go and seek the same amount of, or a similar 50% or more or whatever, more or less, whatever, from any other school districts that they're servicing, and then get a windfall out of the deal. And I didn't bring this up at the last meeting, but I just wanted to throw it out there too, that do any of our drivers at 64 also drive for another district? And is that even theoretically possible that there would be, quote, a windfall? Because technically we're paying 50% on our drivers, but District 123 is going to pay 50% on its drivers, and then District 789 is going to do the same thing over there, right? So at the end, even though those numbers are getting pulled together, the numbers are really only assigned to Joe over here and Sally over here, the different bus drivers.
Yeah, our drivers, the only time it might interweave with another district is a field trip, but that's not even in play. So these are drivers that just drive for us.
Okay. So James, did that make sense, how I presented that?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah, and to address Tom's issue, I'm not certain how real that can happen, but I completely and totally understand his issue. So I did put language in that allows, or requires, I shouldn't say allows, the district to get, in the event that they end up getting 100% from some folks and 80% or 90%, and it does aggregate out where they're making a profit as a whole, that you are entitled to return of your amount up to what you put in, so that there is not a profit to that company. And it does address, if it's possible, other folks have asked for that same thing, it would be on a pro rata basis, but it does address that.
So the contract gives us audit rights.
Correct.
It doesn't require that we audit, but I would assume if we're gonna do this, that we are going to audit, right?
To make sure they're paying the, I want to make sure they're definitely paying the staff. I don't think that would happen, but I think we should ask for documentation to make sure they were paid.
Right, but which I agree with Luann, but to get to Tom's point, to make sure that there wasn't this windfall, and also to make sure they didn't receive PPP or any other type of comp from Fed or state, I assume we want to audit, not just that we have the right to, but we're going to audit.
Yes, probably they run on a 12-month cycle, I would guess, like a regular business.
Yeah.
So I can check with them and see when their financial statements would be ready that would cover during this period of time also.
Okay. James, did you have any thoughts on that in terms of how you're going to recommend that for us or others?
No, you're exactly right. I think that you have the right to audit, and frankly, that's the only way you're going to find this out. It does have a reporting obligation on them, but to ensure that it has actually been complied with, your only real remedy is to conduct the audit. So I agree with you, Rick. If you're going to make sure that this is done, you'd probably have to audit it by yourself. Again, they're supposed to let you know, and there are ramifications if they don't, but the only way to absolutely be certain is to conduct that audit.
Okay. All right. And then again, this is more for the public than the board because it was there the last time too, but the contract still includes provisions in there that that say they cannot get this money in the event that they were to avail themselves of one of the other federal or state subsidies that would otherwise help them, or alternatively that they furloughed the people and then got the money. So this protects the district in the event of either of those instances. That's correct, James?
Correct. It does two things. One, it makes a representation currently that they haven't gotten any money, so that we would have been able to consider that when making our 50%. But then it also does require them to apply to any possible reimbursement aid, apply for tax credits. And then if that money is able to be utilized for the cost that your money is being applied to, then it kicks in that obligation for them to refund again. So we want to make sure that they're at least trying to get money if they're eligible for it, and that they are able to get it and it offsets some of the costs that you guys have made with respect to this amendment. Then you're either going to get back all of it if that aid is sufficient enough, or in proportion to what they received and what you paid. Again, and that'll be determined when you do your audit as well.
Yep. So go ahead, Tom, you're on mute. There you go.
The only, I read the amended agreement. And I think it touched everything that we discussed last week. The only thing is the tax credit that they're entitled to, they're still going to be entitled to it, from my understanding. So if we pay them, they'll still be able to get a tax credit on the amount they paid those employees over the next several months. The PPP loans prevent you from double dipping, from using both, but ours is not that. Ours is, we're agreeing to pay for it, but there are no stipulations against them being able to go get or being able to use the tax credits that they're going to be available to them on their payroll once we give them this money to actually make the payments. Just wanted the board to understand that that's a real possibility here.
So I think it's accurate to characterize last week as we had a few board members who were, I would say, adamant against doing it, at least in its form as last week. We had a few board members who were comfortable with it in its form last week. And then we had maybe one board member who was theoretically comfortable with it but wanted some changes to it. So we were split kind of down the middle last week as to where we were. So I think it goes for both sides of the issue. Is there anybody who either was in favor of it last week who now is not because of these changes, or who was against it last week who is now in favor of it in light of the changes? And anybody want to comment on that?
Rick, it's Fred. I just want to ask a question. This gets us as close to zero for this school year. But, you know, if school were to be delayed, start of school were to be delayed in the fall, they're going to come back to us and ask us to do exactly the same thing now. And we're not going to be able to get that number to closer to zero because we're going to not have much to negotiate with, correct?
That is correct. I'm assuming if that happened in the fall, then at some point we have to say no.
So Luann, maybe I missed this just when we were talking about it, but the reimbursement, so the state is going to definitely, they've said they're reimbursing us?
Yes, they did say. They did say they would be reimbursing the districts, but at the rates they normally do. So that's why I didn't include regular in this calculation at all.
And James, have you heard anything, or maybe even Eric, I guess, it's from a Springfield perspective as to whether, you know, there's going to be a bait and switch here?
They amended the regulation to specifically provide for this last Thursday before the last meeting. So the regs do now allow for this to be reimbursement eligible by the state. So it's currently codified now that you're entitled to it. The only thing that's there is, the amount of reimbursement, and Luann probably can speak to this a little bit better than I can, does change year to year, but it is something that is eligible for reimbursement, and the state has indicated they will reimburse it.
Okay, because obviously that's
Would they not reimburse it?
part of this equation, right? If that doesn't happen, then we're in the negative numbers pretty seriously.
Would they not reimburse it again in the fall if this had to continue?
Well, we would see. Right, James, they would have to come out with further guidance, right?
Well, the amendment to the statute or to the regulations on a reimbursement were not specific to a time frame. So as it stands currently, if this were to go forward and you were willing to entertain it again in the fall, remember this amendment is not, it ends this school year.
Mm-hmm.
From a reimbursement standpoint, it would still be eligible for reimbursement per ISB regs.
Okay, so I mean, I think from my vantage, you guys all know where I was on this last week. I mean, obviously, from my vantage point, the big concession from them was taking less on the next year's contract, both on the gen ed and special ed contract. So that did move the needle. I think we were up in the air last week as to whether or not, moving it even down to zero would move the needle, but it looks like when you throw the reimbursement back in from the state, it does move the needle down to zero. So anyone else that felt strongly one way or the other last week want to chime in?
I think this is a good solution. So thanks, Luann.
Thank you.
I agree.
And James.
And then with I guess Fred's issue, we'll have to discuss that later. And then maybe a possibility is if we need bus drivers to do any type of work, like drop things off. I think I briefly discussed that with Eric. I know the state mentioned, remote learning is not only electronic, it also includes, dropping off paper things. So if there are things that we need done so that we're not just giving money to the bus company for free, is there something in exchange in the fall that we need from them?
Right, and at that point, we may have, a lot more children on free lunch. So we have offered, to bring lunches if someone cannot get there to pick up their food. So there could be those type of opportunities, or delivering materials, especially to our younger students. I know some districts have used them for that, where the driver basically stops at the bus stop and, lines up the packages out on the sidewalk or something, and the people are picking them up. So yeah, there's all different kinds of options.
So are we basically agreeing to give the 50% to the special ed drivers and the gen ed drivers aren't getting anything?
No, I mean, they'll use the money how it works best for them. I mean, they don't know that we're just, as far as they know, this is the reimbursement that we are agreeing to. I don't see where they would just pay special ed drivers out of it.
So does the state care how that they reimburse us for the SPED drivers? Do they care that this money is going somewhere else?
Well, we're only asking for 50% of SPED, and then of that, they're only going to reimburse 65%.
The state only cares, Larry, on your expenses. They look at the bottom line. So you would submit to them that you paid X during this period of time, and then that would be the basis for the reimbursement period, for the reimbursement amount, I'm sorry.
And remember, Larry, that, there's no mandate whatsoever from the state for us to do this. We're not required under any, executive order or anything.
You made that note. The 1.4%, did I miss it? Did you tell me how many dollars that equates to?
It was about 22,000 when I first started looking at it. So it's probably about 22,000. But then we would, so it's about a $22,000 difference.
And Luann, just for my own edification, so what was the gen ed transport? Was it roughly equivalent? Was it also about 300 grand?
Hold on one second. If you can hold on one second, I'll pull that up.
I mean, I think it's, while she's pulling it up, I think it's at least relevant to the equation, because if they gave on, originally they came to us with both special ed and gen ed, and they gave up on that. It sounds to me like that probably was similar.
Yeah, so the regular education cost for the 54 days is about over 450,000.
Okay, so they were asking for 750 grand initially when they first came to you with this.
It was well over that, because if we had paid at, you know, even, I mean, when I looked at 80%, it was over like 800,000, and I basically just said there's just no way my board's going to do that. So that's why we initially came down to 50%.
All right, but even at 50, it was about 750 grand, you know, obviously minus reimbursements. So they've come down from 750 down to 290, and then they've come from 3.75 on both of the contracts to 1.4 on one of them and 0 on the other. So they
That's
have
correct.
moved quite a bit from at least the first volley in this thing.
That is correct.
All right. Any other thoughts from any board members before I check on public comment? All right, Natasha, any public comment on this?
No, none.
Okay.
No, none.
All right, so we have 3 agenda items for this, each related to the various amendments. So we'll take them in order. And if some, the first one relates simply to the extension of the contract, and this is for extension of the special ed contract.
The first one's regular ed, Rick.
Oh, wait, so why? Oh, I'm sorry, in order in our board packet. I was looking at the numbers for second and third. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's titled Third Amendment to Regular Education Transportation Services Contract. So we have a motion related to each of these. If anyone would like to make it.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure you're ready. I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the Third Amendment to the Regular Education Transportation Services Contract to Lakeview Bus Lines Incorporated with no increase for the 2019-2020 rates for regular transportation.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Denise had the motion, Fred has the second. So this is, again, just for everybody's sake here, it's the 1-year extension to the regular bus service contract with a 0% increase over this most recent contract that we've had with Lakeview. So is there any further discussion on this particular amendment? Okay, and Natasha, nothing new in the last 30 seconds? Okay.
Okay. Riles,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Salas, yes, Biagi,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great. Okay, so the second one that we have, someone would like to make that motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, Approve the First Amendment to the Special Education Transportation Services Contract to Lakeview Bus Lines Incorporated at a 1.40% increase in the current rates for special education transportation.
Second.
Okay, Fred had the motion and Rebecca had the second. So again, this is the special ed contract with a 1.4% increase for 1 year term. Any discussion from the board in this one? Okay, Natasha, anything new?
None, no comment.
Okay,
Okay, Zellis, yes. Biagi,
yes.
Little,
Yes.
Riles,
No.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay. And the last motion.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the COVID-19 related Second Amendment to the Special Education Transportation Services Contract with Lakeview Bus Lines Incorporated for the period of March 16th, 2020 to June 19th, 2020 as presented.
Second.
Okay, Denise had the motion, Tom had the second. Any further discussion from the board on this one? So this is specifically the motion on the payment for payroll. Okay, Natasha? Nothing new?
There are no comments, no.
Okay, Sotos,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Riles,
No.
Pearl,
Yes.
Biagi,
No.
Sanchez,
No.
Zellis, yes. Let's see, motion carries.
4-3.
4-3, right?
Yep. Okay, thank you, everybody, for that. And thanks, Luann, for your work on that, and James as well.
All right, thanks,
Great.
everybody. Enjoy the
Thank
rest
you.
of
We're
your
going to sign off.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Sounds good. All right, we have a personnel report. So why don't we take a motion on that, and then we can ask Joel anything we've got on that one.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the personnel report for April 27, 2020, noting that the personnel report is based on the recommendation of the superintendent and not upon the board's direct knowledge regarding any of the specific individuals selected for employment.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Denise had the motion, Fred had the second. So, and just, I know this is the first time, I think, for the new board members that we've done this, where we've had a separate vote and you know, for new administrators, and then they show up on the personnel report too. And Joel, is there, I think I've asked this question before, why, but it's just the way it's done legally, right?
Correct. Yes, that's right.
We're technically taking a second vote. I mean, I don't know what, if we voted this personnel report down, I don't know how that would change what we did earlier in the meeting, but again, it's kind of pro forma, but it is what it is.
Right.
So any other discussion on personnel report? Questions for Joel? And Natasha, anything from the public?
No comment.
Okay.
Okay, Riles,
Is that a no comment, or was there actually some, I'm kidding, sorry. Thought you weren't commenting to me.
Riles,
Yes.
Zellis, yes. Little,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Biagi,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great, thank you. All right, so we're moving on to the reason that this meeting was originally called in the first place. So I think we've got about, it looks like 30 or so attendees on the call right now. I thank everybody for permitting us to get some of that other business done that carried over for the last 45 minutes or so. But you've got us for the rest of the night now for as long as we need to talk about this. We want to make sure that we take as much time as needed to go through this. Again, for those of you on the call tonight that may not have been able to make last week's call, we did get a presentation from Dr. Frost on this. The board had some discussion about it for a while. And all along, our intention as a board was, obviously before COVID-19 hit, was to do this all in person and have as many in-person meetings, both on a focus group level and at the board level as possible, to allow as many people to comment and to voice their concerns, their approval of it, whatever it was that the board could hear before finally approving it. And I do want to just bring up something at the beginning of this that Carol and I had a conversation with Dr. Olson earlier today about, and I think it's something that we as a board need to consider as we're going through this motion tonight. And that is, Denise, I know you like the analogy of the dance floor and the balcony. This is a dance floor question we're getting into tonight. We are on the dance floor squarely with this one. This is an operational discussion that we're having. And I'm not saying it's wrong that we're on the dance floor. I'm just saying we're on the dance floor squarely tonight. And as we consider this motion, we want to figure out what's our appetite for, I guess, the way that we approve this tonight. Because technically, under normal circumstances, this probably would have never come to the board. And Dr. Olson, tell me if I'm wrong, or I see you nodding, but this issue, the way that the change that's being made here probably would not have come to the board. We're doing it out of an abundance of caution because of some recent history in special education in the district. And I'm not saying it's a wrong decision, but we are definitely in the operational bucket right now. And so as we approve or not approve whatever we're going to do tonight, we should, as a board, consider the wording of this motion and what it may or may not do to future boards, and what it may or may not do to the administration going forward as to how they may be able to carry out operationally the special education program. So I just want to start with that as a context. Tom?
Rick?
Yep.
Last week, I asked the question, and it was an obvious answer. I was just asking it for the public, whoever was on. There's more people on today, so I want to reiterate it. Whatever happens today with this, and however we decide to move forward, whether we vote on it or something else, it was made clear to us when we asked Leanne and everybody else, this is not the end-all solution to our SPED issues here in the district. It's one element that we're trying to address, and it's not going to end here. We're going to keep adding to this, compounding on top of it, adding to the side of it, getting underneath it, and all the way around it, so that we can address every issue. But this is just addressing one specific situation. So I wanted to make that clear. Yep. Secondly, to your point, Rick, I gave that some thought as well, and I didn't realize that you guys were talking about it or thinking about it. But is it possible that we don't have to vote on it, yet give a vote, or not vote, but give each board member can give their not approval so much, but more, we can give an informal support of the proposal, since it is something that normally we wouldn't be voting on. And we can handle it more as the administration came to the board out of respect for the community and what has happened in the past, to make sure we knew about this and asking us for our support for it and our informal blessing, so that they can move forward and implement it themselves, as opposed to us actually voting on it. That's just my thought.
I think that's something after we go through the presentations and our discussion, I think that's worth having that conversation. That was kind of a little bit along the lines of what Carol and I were talking about with Dr. Olson earlier today, is how we work, if we're going to vote on it, how we word it, and whether it's giving basically open-ended authority to the district, to the administration, to do whatever they want with this, whether it's very narrow, both from an operational standpoint and a cost standpoint. Because theoretically, the way we go with this tonight, if we vote, we could be writing a blank check to the district and giving them the authority, even though they've got to come back to us with each hire for approval. In theory, we could say, do what you want. Or the other way you go is you could be very narrow in the authority we give the administration, which, as I kind of alluded to earlier, sets the precedent for potentially the board jumping into a lot of other operational things that they shouldn't be in the middle of. And it's just, again, it's something I think once we get through the substance of this, I think that's a very important procedural conversation we need to have tonight as to what approval we want to give to this or not. You know, not that we're going to turn it down, just how we want to ratify it or not ratify it. So let's get through the substance part of it first, and then we'll kind of get to those questions. So Eric, do you want to start, or Leanne?
Leanne can start.
Okay.
Very good. So thanks for allowing me to present tonight. I really see this as an extension of the presentation from last week. We're not going to review all the different elements that we did last week. For example, like the iMovie, we went through each of the slides last week and gave a brief recap of the substance of each of the slides. I was not going to do that this week. Just referring to the iMovie as far as looking at the number of views that we've had this year, this past week, and then also looking at how the responses have changed. We also last week talked about an FAQ, a frequently asked question document that we had put together. That document, as well as the iMovie, as well as the feedback form, are still, and our charts from last week showing the responses and the types of the comments that we did receive. Those were all posted on the webpage last week, and those continue to remain up as well. So just looking at this week, we did have a number of additional people look at the video. Last week, I'm going to talk about unique viewers because it looks like people viewed this maybe more than once. So last week we had 901 unique viewers, and this week we had 266 unique viewers for a total of 1,167 viewers. Now it looks like not everyone happened to look at the whole video. It looked like around 6.5 minutes was the average length that people did look at this. One of the things that I noted by looking at this information though was we were offering a community forum on one night. I'm not thinking that we would have had 1,167 people come to the table at that night. So I actually, I think I'm kind of learning a little bit more about, you know, a way to reach into the community and make sure that everyone has this information. While I think it would have been advantageous for us to have a night session with community members, I also think, you know, pairing that with the opportunity for people to view this at their leisure and really think about the information consciously also had some great benefits for the community. So I think that's one of the things that we'll consider, you know, moving forward in some of the things that we do as well. When we look at the response rate, we ended up as of noon on Friday with 255 responses. This is in comparison to the 174 respondents that we had the week before. So we did increase by approximately 40% more responses this week. Again, the survey responses were representative of all of our schools and also included parents who have children who are in outplacements. When we look at the survey responses, and I'm going to share with you in a minute, 3 charts, and each chart has a different value. And as much as we tried to make the charts having the same high value, we were unable to do that. So when you look at the charts, you'll notice that the strengths chart has a value of 125. The concerns chart has a high value of 30, and then the other feedback chart has a high value of 60. I just want to make that distinction because when you look at the charts, you might think that the values are the same, but they are not. They are different. Okay, so I am going to attempt to share my screen. Hopefully I'll have better success this week. And it looks like I do. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. Success. I'm learning a lot about technology during the COVID-19. So the first chart that we're looking at is the strengths that we found in the response. And just so you're aware, when you look at the feedback form that we provided, all of the responses were open-ended responses. So they were not menus. So when we had to go through each of the respondents and what their comments were, they had to be individually coded. And each respondent, if they had more than one comment, each comment was coded. So just so you know that, and that also Angela was the one, Angela Phillips, the assistant director, was the one who actually did the coding. I did the analysis, and then I gave Angela my analysis to make sure that she had the same conclusions that I had drawn. Again, just trying to make sure that we had a good verification process, making sure that we were accurately reflecting the data that we were seeing within the survey responses. So again, this first chart is in regards to strengths. We had 313 strength comments, and this is in comparison to 217 the week before. The top three are identified as specialized instruction, having almost 125 comments. And this was more specifically addressing and supporting needs of students, students with special education, and providing appropriate services for them. The next strength we had almost 50 comments, and that was in the opportunity to remain within district. And then the third strength we had approximately 40 comments, and it was for the inclusion of students, both as a benefit for general education students and special education students, with some of that integration piece and the building of acceptance. Okay, the next chart has to do with the concerns that were listed in the responses. So we had 273 responses for our concerns, and this is in comparison to 197 the week before. The most concern that we had was in staff allocation, really asking how many staff and when will staff know what their assignment is for next year. And that rated at approximately almost 30 comments. The next highest comment was in regards to cost. Respondents were concerned with the cost increase, especially in light of COVID-19. Again, one of the things that's hard to project with cost at this point is we need to see what our pool of students are going to be and what their needs are so that we can accurately project allocations. I am very cost conscious, so I don't want to ask for more services than what we need. I don't also want to ask for less services and then come back and ask for more. One of the things with cost is, as we've talked about before, this program is really looking at students who may be in outplacements currently and bringing those students back. It's also looking at students that we currently have and whether or not we're looking for outplacements for them at this point, because we do have some students in that situation. And we also have students within District 64 that are in a program, but because of the components of this program, the way that it's structured, the environment is structured, the teaching strategies that we utilize, that this would be a program that would more appropriately meet their needs. So when you look at those three aspects, one of the things that we look at with cost is students who are in outplacements are generally at a higher rate than what the district rate is. Part of that is because we use special education co-ops, and because we're not a member of any of the co-ops, we pay a non-member rate, which is higher than a member rate. We also use private therapeutic day programs, which are also at a higher rate. So it's really hard at this point to say whether or not the cost is going to be cost neutral or a little bit more. I really do not project the cost to be potentially more, especially with the number of students that we are looking at and the types of services that we need.
Dan, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
So with the top three biggies, cost, staff allocation, and loss of homeschool, just in general, with those as quote concerns from folks, did they see one or more of those issues as kind of, I don't know how else to say it, but like kind of a deal killer, like that was fatal to the program in their mind? Or was it just a concern? You know, like, was it something they're concerned about, but they still see us moving forward?
So I think that there's still a little bit of confusion as far as the program that we're presenting tonight. And again, what has happened is that the conversation has evolved over time. So when we talk about it, I think that there is still some confusion with some people as far as whether or not there's an instructional and resource opportunity within each of the buildings. And yes, there will be an instructional and a resource opportunity in each of the buildings. Are we moving completely to a cluster model? No, we are not moving to a cluster model. That was one of the models that we looked at, but we got feedback from PT3 and we got feedback from the Special Education Advisory Committee. We looked at kind of, you know, adjusting that. And so I would not call this a cluster program anymore. I would really call this specialized programs. And we're looking at a specialized program for the students that, for the profile that we identified in this presentation. And one of the other aspects that we've been talking about is also creating a program for students who have some behavioral needs, and looking at that, you know, in the subsequent years. At this point, I am not looking at potentially other specialized programs. I'm not saying it's out of the realm, but that's really not something that I'm really looking for as a need for this district at this time. I think Mr. Soto spoke earlier about, you know, making sure people understood that, you know, even this presentation tonight doesn't mean that we're done with special education as far as looking at our continuum of services. We're going to continue to look at our continuum of services, and we're going to be looking at, you know, our current programs and things that we need to build and tweak. You know, last year, one of the things I think some people were concerned about was that we didn't look at doing a continuum of services last year. But there were components that we did discuss about the continuum of services last year, mainly the building of the curriculum maps. And those curriculum maps are absolutely useful for our resource and our instructional programs. I think I probably over-answered your question.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So the third concern was the loss of the homeschool, which again, we're not talking about every child leaving, who's in an instructional classroom, leaving their homeschool to go into a cluster program, okay? All of our buildings will continue to have our instructional classroom and our resource classrooms in each building.
Leanne, can I ask a follow-up as well, similar to Rick? One of the top 5 concerns is staff training. And so, which, you know, that's come up with the concern in the past about our special education program. So can you talk about some of the training connected with SLC?
Sure. So one of the main components of that training will be the structured teaching approach. And actually, we're very fortunate in this community because we have Dreams. And Have Dreams is a, I believe they're a non-for-profit organization that really works with parents and educators in regards to students who have autism or have characteristics of autism. And so even as we were talking about this program, many of our staff had asked to go to the Have Dreams workshops. So some of our staff have already been trained in the structured teaching approach. So again, they're local, and it would be someone that we would partner with in order to make sure that we have those training opportunities.
And I guess I'm hearing kind of that some of the staff has this training, which is great. And I wonder, with any program, how do we build in continuous learning, professional development training and I'm sure you've thought about it, I just want to reiterate, I think that's certainly a part of a successful program.
So if this does get approval, I will be on the phone with Have Dreams so that we can coordinate how we're going to provide this training, additional training to the staff who's going to be working in the program, and then also the staff in the building. Okay. All right, and then we also had additional feedback. So we had 236 responses this week. We had 152 responses last week. The highest response was in regards to appreciation of the communication and benefits to students. When we talk about that was really interesting with the additional feedback area, because sometimes parents or respondents just put in additional comments, thanks for communicating this with us. We really think that this was going to be a great program for students. We like the idea of keeping students within the community. Sometimes they express concerns, but we still kept those within the additional feedback. Sometimes they address other strengths that were found in the strengths chart as well. So again, about 60 comments were related to the appreciation of the communication and benefits to students. Almost 20 comments pertain to students and staff, basically with the staff allocation concern. And then a little less than 20 comments related to specialized instruction, though these were mostly positive about increasing the continuum of services and including students. On the survey, we also had 23 people who had indicated follow-up contact. All of them were contacted either by phone or by email. I did participate in 8 conversations with individuals, and then I also had 2 other conversations with individuals via email. The other people did not respond as far as needing to have additional conversation. Okay. Any questions in regards to the survey responses? Okay. So I know that there was a couple of questions last week in regards to the number of students that we have for this program. So I went back and looked, and we have currently we have 11 students who are in outplacements that are kindergarten through 3rd grade. 4 of them meet the profile of the program that we are looking to adopt. We also have 2 additional students who are in private settings, who are residents of the district. We also have students currently within district who we are looking for outplacements, and then also some students in district where this program might better meet their needs than the current program that they're in. At this time, we have 5 parents who have already asked for consideration for their child to attend this program.
And 5, so run through those numbers again. So it was 5 parents who've already asked for consideration of those 6 you just mentioned?
I'm 5 parents in total. I'm trying to think.
So you said we had 4 within our, here that kids that we were specifically thinking would fit into this program, and then 2 that were currently outplaced. So that's 6 total. And you said 5 parents are in?
So what I said is that 4 students of the 11 who are in outplacements meet the profile that we are looking for this program to incorporate. We have an additional 2 students who are residents of the district who attend a private setting.
Okay.
And then we have internally some students who are currently being possibly outplaced, as well as some students who are currently within our programs that this program may better meet their needs than the current program that they're in.
Okay, and so then again, the 5 parents that have reached out to you and said they'd like to participate in the program, those were already part of the numbers you were factoring in, or are those potentially parents of other kids?
It's a mixture.
Okay.
So we have not actively gone out to pursue any parents at this point, because I wouldn't do that unless the program was approved. So these are parents who actually approached us saying, I believe my student will benefit from this program. We think it'll meet his or her needs. And if the program moves forward, we would like to be a part of it.
Can I ask about, you briefed, or you've had all the administrators of all the schools in, and you've gone over this program with every administrator?
We did it with every building leader, and then Leanne's done it separately with her coordinators. So yes, every administrator has heard it, and all the principals were unanimous in supporting it.
Yes.
We have some involvement in special ed with the parochial schools. Will this have any effect on those folks?
No. Our involvement with parochial schools is through proportionate share. And actually every May we do what we call a timely and meaningful consultation. And based upon the dollars that we get from the state that are earmarked for a proportionate share, that is how we determine what services are going to be provided. It's a very small amount of money. This year, I think it's around $125,000. And really between all 5 of the parochial schools that we provide services, we're only able to provide speech services. So those are the only services that parochial schools receive from us.
So, I see this as kind of a fuel to turn us, to kind of jettison into where we should have been years ago. But I've brought this up before. These are, I think this is wonderful up through 3rd grade, but I got to look, 4th through 8th grade. We've got to really do some real hard concentration once we put this program in effect to bring in more and more and more services for our 4th through 8th graders.
Well, so the idea is, again, one of the concerns is, as students get higher in grade level, asking them to switch schools is much more difficult because they've established those relationships. Staff have good relationships with them, families have good relationships, and so forth. So when you start a program from K-3, and you can build upon that. So once they're 3rd grade and then move into 4th grade, we would open then, we would either determine whether it be 4th and 5th grade or 3rd through 5th grade. Once those 5th graders would move on to middle school, then we would open up that middle school. So this program then could continue on a linear path through for the students up through 8th grade.
But yes, Larry, I agree with you. We definitely need the services at those higher grade levels.
And Larry, that I think goes a little bit to what Carol and I and Dr. Olson were talking about earlier today, about whether our approval tonight narrows it down to just what's on the table right now, or whether it's giving the administration that ability to expand it without having to come back to the board, or what precedent we're setting by giving approval for one but not the other. I think that goes hand in hand with it right now.
Well, we've talked about this over the years, and the board needs to stay informed, and we need to be fully aware of what we're doing in special ed, and we can be somewhat of a conduit of opinions, but you're right. We're back to, you know, we shouldn't be approving anything. We can give them a consensus of opinion, but this is where our superintendent gets the big money, and this is his and the staff and Dr. Frost, and you know, we share the responsibility somewhat, but we basically give a consensus of opinion on how we feel about the program and where it's going.
So I know we have at least one that I saw public comment, Natasha, right? Have there been more since?
We do. I actually have a question for you. So will you accept multiple comments from the same person? So let me explain. One pertains to the special education program specifically, and one is a follow-up comment on your balcony versus dance floor discussion.
Okay. I don't personally have a problem with that. Does any of the board members have a problem with having two from the, two written comments from the same person?
No.
No.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, so it's a bit lengthy. I'll try to read quickly through it. I think we'll be under the 3 minutes, and I hope I don't butcher anything. This is from Mickey to Sia, and I believe I see her in our attendees list to the right. So Mickey, I hope I do you some justice. Here we go. Good evening. First, I'd like to thank you for continuing to do the work of District 64 during the pandemic. I hope you and your families are safe and healthy. Second, I wanted to provide a comment about the proposed plan to create a structured learning center at Washington next year. As you know, I have written to the board and provided public comments on this topic many times before. I have been a proponent of the district at least giving careful and thoughtful consideration to the neighborhood school model. While I understand that the COVID situation drastically changed the process to evaluate a proposed model, I remain disappointed that the neighborhood school model was not seriously considered. During one of the past couple of board meetings, at least some board members asked the administration to provide the pertinent information, cost, structure, pros and cons of the various models being seriously considered, including the cluster model and the neighborhood school model. I am disappointed that the cluster model is being presented as the only option. It seems clear that this program is setting the foundation in the future for a cluster program district-wide for all grades.
I think we lost Natasha right midstream there. Uh-oh. Is everybody else seeing the same thing I am? I just see a frozen screen right now from her.
Yes.
Okay.
I actually have that comment if you would like me to continue.
Yeah, do you mind? Natasha, if you can hear us, we're moving on. Oh, it looks like she's gone. It looks like she may have lost her connection.
Okay, so I think she left off right around here. While I understand that the COVID situation drastically changed the process to evaluate a proposed model, I remain disappointed that a neighborhood school model was not seriously considered. During one of the past couple of board meetings, at least some board members asked the administration to provide the pertinent information such as costs, structures, pros, cons of the various models being seriously considered, including the cluster model and the neighborhood school model. I am disappointed that the cluster model is being presented as the only option. It seems clear that this program is setting the foundation in the future for a cluster program, district-wide for all grades. For the reasons I've stated many times before, I would be very concerned about a model where all children in the instructional program were housed at one school. I believe that would be detrimental to not only the children in the program, but also children in the general education setting. During a PT3 meeting, I was assured that this proposal does not supplant all instructional programs in the various schools, that addresses a unique set of students who would not do well in their neighborhood schools and who have been or are at risk of being outplaced. I hope that is the case, and I think it would be important to confirm that in public. I ask that the board inquire about that during the meeting. I have reviewed the video both as sent recently and during the PT3 meeting. The actual structure of the classroom and the program being recommended, in my opinion, seems good. It is actually very similar to the structure that is currently in place at Emerson for my son. That is one of the reasons why it must be housed at one designated school. I understand that the issue of outplacements is an urgent concern. Those families certainly need their needs addressed ASAP, and I do appreciate that progress has finally been made on that front. Given that it seems like that a cluster model is likely a foregone conclusion, I would ask one thing. Please consider at the very least having a SLC at each middle school and 2 elementary schools, 1 feeder at each middle school. That way the students will be in their neighborhood schools for at least middle school. That approach could be at least be seen as a middle ground. Thank you for considering my comments. Oh, I see Natasha's.
Thank you, Leanne. I just got kicked out. My worst nightmare come true. So, do you want me to read the follow-up?
Actually, because I think the follow-up touches on a different issue. I was going to say either Dr. Frost or Dr. Olson want to address any of those or all of those, issues raised in there with respect to what we've got on the table tonight.
Sure. Again, I think there is confusion. We did explain what a cluster model was at one point, but based upon the feedback that we received from PT3 and from our Special Education Advisory Committee, we really kind of took that feedback into consideration and are not looking at this as a cluster model program. Each building will continue to maintain their instructional and their resource programs. Currently, we do not have, what we're proposing tonight is not a program that is in any of our buildings right now. It does mimic a program that was in the program up until about 9 years ago. That program was eliminated. People who were associated with that program in the past, we still have some in district who worked in that program. We're not sure exactly of the reasons why that program was eliminated. It happened during the time that Park Ridge had, and the surrounding districts had really eliminated the use of the special ed co-op called METSUP at that point. And it was decided at that time then that we would go into a homeschool model. So all the students went into that homeschool model. So really at that point, the district lost, the METSUP programs and then also lost what was called the STRIVE program. Now, because some of our staff are still around, I think there's some remnants of the components of that program still around. But once this program gets up and running, if you give permission for this, you will see that the teaching approach is very, very different. Yes, a lot of Emerson staff were those who were involved in the STRIVE model, and they do have those components, but the teaching style, the teaching strategies are very different. There are some environmental things that are noticeably the same between SLC and the program that we have going on at Emerson right now in the instructional classroom.
I think I'll just add on that, as I've said previously, that, when we add all these programs, when we're full K-8, we will still never go over 1% of the whole district. So this isn't about putting these programs in it at every school. It's only for these specialized students. I think the other piece is that, we feel that you hire us to bring to you what are the best solutions. So we don't want to bring you choices that we think are lesser than what this would be, or lesser than what the students in District 64 deserve, or what would be appropriate for this time. So we don't believe those other models are a good fit for District 64 at this time. But as Leanne shared last week, just because we're making this decision doesn't mean it makes all the other decisions. We still need to make those. So if we want to do an inclusive model, we can still do that. but that has a huge cost to it and a huge shift in the district that I don't think we're at that place, and that I don't think this is the time to do it. This is why we're bringing this one model to you at this time.
Can I just ask a procedural question? So, you know, we're getting used to this online virtual format, but if this was a comment at the board meeting, I don't know if we'd respond to it. Our protocol is not to respond. So I don't know. I'm just trying to get what's different about this. And can you help me understand that?
So I think what's different, Denise, is that we're going to be voting tonight. And if anybody on the board is swayed by that issue, I mean, like example, if someone comes during public comment on non-agenda items and complains about the lunch program, but the board's not taking any action, okay, we can, you know, that complaint can go to Eric or to whomever, you know, Luann, they can address it. Tonight we're voting, or we potentially are gonna vote on this thing. And I want everybody, I want all of our questions and all of the public's questions that are being presented to us, especially under this kind of weird scenario, to be addressed. And frankly, I think, as I envisioned, if this were in public tonight, or I shouldn't say it's not in public, it is in public, but if we were in person tonight, I didn't view this as a quote board meeting. I viewed this as a public hearing, that this was a public hearing on this issue that we were going to then potentially vote on. And the idea, I think we were all in lockstep, that we wanted as much comment and questions and people trying to poke holes in it as possible, so that we could decide, you know, appropriately with all of those. So that's how I see it differently than a normal public comment on non-agenda type item.
So with that in mind, we have a couple of more comments.
Yeah, so Natasha, do you mind if maybe we skip, not that I know you said there's a second one from Mickey as well about the balcony dance floor, but that's kind of a different.
Right, no, we have about SPED specifically.
Yeah, SPED specifically, and then we'll take that again on the back end when we start talking process.
Yeah, understood. So this is from Tom Fisher. It's split in two separate emails, so give me a second. The audit was conducted 2 years ago, and the program proposed will only aid kids K through 3, with no plans for the kids in 4 through 8 who have been in a broken system for 2 to 5 years. Can you clarify what the plans are to give an adequate continuum of services for kids currently in 4 through 7? And the second part of the question is, many of these survey concerns are related to cost, but the cost of the current system was not shared. How much does it currently cost to maintain the current system, along with the cost of all the outplaced children, transportation, and legal fees? That concludes the question.
So that was both emails, just so you said it was over 2 emails? Okay.
Correct.
So Leanne, I mean, if I heard you correctly earlier, I think with the cost, you know, there's an offset here to what we're proposing, what you're proposing, because many of the children who are going to be brought into this program would have otherwise been outplaced, and there would have been a cost to the district and the state, you know, for offset on that. So is that accurate?
Yes. So, you know, again, one of the things is as we stated in the proposal that we provided to you last week, yes, we have a pool of students right now, and some of them are currently in outplacements, and we will invite those that we feel are appropriate to go into this program. We also have students who are in the process of one of the recommendations being an outplacement. So we would offer this program to the parents as well. Again, the way that we had this set up is parents can say no as well. So, you know, I just want to make sure that that's clear. And I think that kind of weighs into this cost piece too, because I can't guarantee that all of these students are going to be from outplacements. Some of these students will be within our internal programs right now, but this is a better model for them as far as them achieving their educational goals. Does that answer your question?
Yep, and I think you want to just touch on your, or Dr. Olson, on the 4 through 8 or 4 through 7 question that Mr. Fisher raised?
Yes, so I think also is that these programs take time, staffing, figuring out the students, figuring out the place, the location, the amount of meetings and discussions that we've had already just for the maybe, not even to be able to go through it, is that we have to start somewhere. And so this is why we're asking the board to please let us get started. As Larry has said a couple of times, this is something overdue, and we want to get rolling with it, which is also why we decided to, move ahead with this and not wait another year, because that would have, backed everything up even further after that. So we really need to get one piece into place first, and then we can build the second piece and keep going from there. But we need to get started.
Yeah. And Leanne, Mr. Fisher's comment, I think, about the cost may have been kind of in a backdoor way to what I was asking about the survey results earlier, that I'm really curious that cost was such a high up, quote, concern raised in the survey, because at least, again, maybe I'm mischaracterizing what I've heard the last 3 years, but cost did not once come up in a conversation from the many, many, many people that were at our board meetings over the years, reading comments to the board. I mean, this is the first time I've seen people say cost is a concern. And that's why I'm curious as to whether those, however many it was, 60 or 70 folks that said cost is a concern, thought that what you're proposing here is too costly for the district. And if so, that's a opposite message from what we've been hearing.
So before the PT3 meetings, there used to be these little, I don't know what you called them, Leanne, but those parent meetings, or I don't even know if you were there, but I think Mike Padovic would run them. And there was one, I believe, Luann was there, and the whole subject was cost, I believe, and how basically the district was saying that there is enough money for SPED and cost was not an issue. I don't know if any of that is still available or online, but I'm sure there are presentations that exist still. And I think a lot of the, parents who participate in P3, I think they were at that meeting. And I believe at least Tom Fisher was there at that meeting. So but it was, it was like a big discussion and a big topic and a presentation with Luann and all of her little,
Well, I remember the board was at the one with Padovic, where Luann presented an entire evening of money. Leanne, this was shortly before you joined us.
Yes.
And, but again, I wasn't hearing people saying, oh my gosh, this is going to cost too much money, at least from the public. I was hearing the exact opposite was, you guys need to spend as much money possible to make this happen.
Well, right, no, the district, the gist of that whole meeting was that the reason that SPED had all these issues wasn't because they were cutting costs or that we didn't have the resources. It was that, I'll see if I can find it, but it was that one meeting where, Padovic had that cordless microphone and we had all those technical issues.
So Rick, I think what you're saying is that typically cost to the district wasn't one of the top priorities to the people who were interested in us to really take a hard look at our potentially failing SPED programs. And now it seems to be very high on the list and a big concern. Leanne, may I ask, is it possible that you had a larger reach to potentially not residents with no students in the district, taxpayers who don't have kids in the district that could potentially have weighed in on those?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, because this went out, remember, it was out on our website. We sent it out through School Messenger, so anybody can, register for School Messenger. It actually went into the paper as well. So community members did have the link, and even when you look at, who answered, many people identified different roles. Some of them were parents and staff, some of them were just parents, some of them were just staff, some of them identified as community members. We even had business owners on there as well. So absolutely, and I could tell in some of the comments, there was it was very apparent that some of the respondents did not have students within the district any longer and were concerned in regards to their property tax increases.
So Rick, with having that said, it makes a lot of sense as to why we see the two different reasonings for it. And for me personally, I feel for all the taxpayers in our district, absolutely, especially in today's economic times. However, we've been working really hard and really long on trying to get a really good SPED program in this district and getting it moving in the right direction. So I'm not quite sure if there's any way of balancing out how many of those comments were from people who have children in the district and who don't.
Yeah, I agree, Tom. And I was frankly, I was more curious as to Tom Fisher's comment about cost and sort of how it related to what we saw in that survey, because maybe I'm misinterpreting what he said in there, but anyway, I mean, I agree with you, Tom. I think we have to balance it.
So just from the survey, we did have 3 people identify themselves as business owners and 39 identifying them as community members only. And then going back to the survey responses, again, we're talking about 255 responses and 30 comments were related to concerns with cost.
Thank you.
They might not have those concerns with cost if they knew what we paid for outplacement every year.
Correct.
Right.
Which is why I asked the question, Larry. Thank you for helping me clarify that. It's people who have not been at these meetings and who have not been involved in this for the over a year or two that we've been going at it, may have made their comment about cost without having the full picture. Not saying that their comments about cost should be discounted. I'm just saying that they may just not have had the full picture as to what Larry said. There's so many elements involved in what got us to where we are today and what's driving us.
Right. My only point was that I think the SPED parents have been very conscious about cost, and I think from my discussions with them, they are the ones who have looked into the budget as opposed to the non-SPED parents. So they have, been concerned about it. It's not, I don't think anyone was, on board with spending crazy amounts of money, and they do realize how expensive all of the outplacements are.
So Natasha, are there other SPED substantive related emails that you've received?
No.
So that's it, just those two?
That's it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So before we go on to sort of the procedural part of the discussion, any other discussion on the substance as it stands right now from the board? That sounds like no. Okay. All right. Why don't we, if we don't, and if I see a question.
Yeah. Right on time. So I'll read it. This is from Lorena Fisher. I respect that we need to start somewhere, but what is the difference between not enough space for gen ed at Washington versus not enough space / programs for special ed kids in the district? When there is not enough space, emergency committees were put in place and action moved swiftly. What is the difference and why is the priority as different?
I didn't understand all those components, but I will say that if we had not put an addition onto Washington, we would have not recommended Washington for this program. And there should be no adverse effect to any of the gen ed pieces at Washington by having this program there.
I think the other thing is too, though, is, when you're starting a new program, you really want to start off small. And to have a whole continuum from K through 8 and figuring out the glitches along the way and looking at the number of students that you're going to have, it's more complicated. again, I concur with Dr. Olson in that, you know, we have to start somewhere. And I think starting small, making sure that we maintain the quality, ensuring that we maintain the focus on this program is key for it to be effective for our students. And so as much as I understand people wanting to have more, I really do believe that sometimes slow and steady is a much stronger process.
Any other thoughts from the board on Mrs. Fisher's email before we move on?
I just want to say this. We give every student in District 64 the same consideration. We don't consider gen ed over special ed. Every student in this district deserves our best, and we give it to them.
Absolutely.
Okay, Natasha, do you want to read Nikki Tessia's email about the dance floor balcony question?
Sure. So once again, from Nikki Tessia, I didn't know if I could submit multiple questions or comments, but if so, I have a question about the balcony versus dance floor question and the observation that this discussion is squarely within the operations ambit. What is the authority for that view? It seems to me that in the gen ed setting, less drastic changes are only made with board approval. In addition, I believe that the below excerpts that are highlighted from the board policy online put these questions squarely within the board's ambit. Please explain why the current discussion falls outside of the below. She then listed all the items of board policy 2 column 20, if you want to take a look at it, or I can read all the items if you want. Rick, do you want me to read?
I'll pull up 220 and put it on the screen. How's that?
That's perfect.
Give me a sec. It'll take me a second to get there. Is there any more to the email other than?
No, it concludes with the list that is in board policy 2 column 20.
While I'm pulling that up, I mean, I guess the one.
And I do have an additional SPED comment if you want me to read that while you're looking for the policy.
Wait, Natasha, were there any other policies listed, or was it just the 2 colon?
No, just the 2 column 20.
Okay. So this is in the board policy manual, the powers and duties. And I believe that this falls in line with what the state statute authorizes school boards to do. It's pretty much the same thing, if not identical to what the state statute reads. So these are all of our powers and duties that we have the authority to act on. But traditionally, I mean, Dr. Lopez, you're on the screen here, or you're on the call here too. You know, approving curriculum, textbooks, and educational services. In my time on the board in the last 3 years, you've given us a lot of presentations. I can count on less than one hand the times that you've asked us for approval to implement a particular curriculum or a textbook or an educational service. Am I correct with that?
I believe we've shared a recommendation with you for the materials, and you've approved the purchase.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, this is something that every elected body struggles with, whether it's a school board or a city or a park district, is what's purely operational and left to the executive of that organization versus what the board is supposed to do. And I think we've said since day one that the 7 of us are not experts in special education. We're here to act as oversight and to set policy for the district, but we're not here to direct operations of this district. That's why we have a superintendent and several assistant superintendents to run this district. So, I mean, that's my own personal feeling. If anyone else has thoughts on that and wants to respond to that, but
I think we should also just, oh, Rick, if you want to screen share
Oh, sorry.
2:80 while you're at it. That was our oath, and there's a little something in there that might have to do with this, and we discussed, you know, whether it's vote worthy or motion worthy.
Which one was it again?
2:80. It's our oath.
Yep. Can you
So
all
let's
see that?
see. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 6. Hold on. No, 7. I shall assist in establishing a structure and an environment designated to ensure all students have the opportunity, and it goes on. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. I don't think, you know, we're necessarily overstepping our bounds. It's generally what part of our job is.
Hey, Rick, I agree with Carol in the sense that we should definitely assist in establishing these structures. And I think we've really done that here. We've been more involved than we ever have been. But I also don't think it affects your comments as to whether we should consider not voting or potentially just giving our blessing in an informal way. It doesn't change the fact whether we help assist or not. So I think there's a little bit of both for us to consider here.
Yep.
So I just have a question. I was not on the board when you guys had that issue that blew up all of the SPED stuff with the moving of the students early. What was the conclusion? Was that should have been brought to the board before?
I think the conclusion at the time was we were caught completely, you know, without any knowledge of it, and it should have been brought to our attention. I don't know. I mean, for those of you who were on the board at the time, I don't know how each of you feel about whether we should have voted on that change. I know how I feel about it, and that is that I don't think it was our place to vote on that change, but I would have certainly wanted to know that a major change in the way things were going was coming so that we could anticipate it, if nothing else. And if the board, I mean, I guess the debate always is, and again, this transcends school boards, the debate is always, you know, we have the authority to tell Eric to do pretty much anything, you know, from a board standpoint. If we, you know, whatever it is, we can tell him implement this or fire this person, or even though technically speaking, the board policy doesn't say we do that or are supposed to do that, but that's not what boards do. That's not what city councils do. That's not what, you know, boards of education do. There are times when it's appropriate, and we've felt, I think, this board and the previous board, that it was appropriate to get into the weeds much more on this issue, generally special ed, than we would have normally done because there were problems. And I think this board and the previous board has gotten in the weeds. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying we needed to be in the weeds to make sure that these changes were being implemented. And tonight, my only concern with this in voting formally is whether or not if we vote formally, we might be putting the administration in a tough spot. One, because they're going to have to come to, depending on how we word this motion tonight, they may have to come to us every time they want to implement this program for a different issue. So tonight it's going to be on the autism spectrum. The next time it's going to be for Downs. The next time it's going to be for another, you know, something else. And I don't know that that's what our intent is tonight to do. I think my vision of this, my own personal opinion, was we were approving or giving our consent to a conceptual model that was different than what we've been doing. But how they actually implement that, I don't know, is a board question. That's my own 2 cents.
I just have a comment. You know, like Rick said, 3 years ago, we were forced into the weeds. And we were forced into those weeds because we'd lost good faith. And this is a different day. And we have a different team. And faith has been restored. And, you know, I'm all for being informed, and I'm all for giving a consensus of opinion from the board. But I think my personal opinion is we don't want to vote on this. That's my personal opinion. The rest of the board may not agree with me, but we don't ever want to get involved in narrowing the scope of operations of the superintendent.
If I can interrupt, we have a couple of additional comments. So I'll start in order of reception. This one is from Grant Houghton, who is a parent of an outplaced student and a former PT3 member. In listening to the board meeting right now, I think Larry's note that the administration needs to be responsible at this point, and the board and residents can provide input and guidance into the SLC proposal. But we did hire a new SPED director and a new administrator to help fix our issues. Our neighborhood school model failed our kids, and I don't see how it could work within budget constraints of District 64. I applaud the work that the new administration has completed to get us to this point, even though it's a small step. And I applaud everyone who continues to put time into making our SPED continuum of education a priority, the board, residents, parents, etc. My main hope is that the board keeps pushing for speed to continue to solve the past SPED audit. So that was one of the 2 comments received. And here's the second one from Lorena Fisher. With all due respect, Mr. Riles, if all kids are treated the same as a D64, why is there no plan in place for kids in special ed that have had deficient services for the past 2 to 5 years that an audit confirmed 2 years ago? I understand Dr. Olson and Dr. Frost are new and inherited the problem. The past board should be respectful to the parents and kids that have been negatively affected. That's all I have for now.
Okay, so heard from a couple people on the board on what, if anything, we vote on tonight. So I'm curious just to get everybody else's thoughts before, I don't want to take a vote to take a vote, but I'd like to get consensus on whether or not there's, an interest in taking a vote. And then I guess if there is interest in taking a vote, we have to start looking at what that motion, how that motion is going to read. So I'd just be curious to hear. I've heard Larry say no. I've heard Tom. I think you're kind of maybe leaning towards not voting, but giving consent but not voting. Anyone else want to share their thoughts?
Can you explain give consent but not voting? Just procedurally, what does that mean?
Well, I think voting is authorizing something very specific. Whatever is the wording in the motion, we're going to be voting on and approving, versus basically giving consent to the proposal that's in front of us right now, knowing that, for instance, Dr. Frost, Dr. Martin, and Dr. Olson are going to come back to us in a month or 2 and say, okay, we're going to implement, we now need to hire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And here's what we need to do that. And then there's going to be another thing. We're going to need to, spend this much money to outfit the room, because it was the way the plans for Washington right now were, didn't have this contemplated in that. Right, the way the motion, and again, we don't have to go with the motion that's in our books, but the way the motion is on the table right now, it kind of just leaves everything very vague. And I think the question is, what's that doing? Is that even helpful, what we're doing? Is that effectively just kind of giving consent to the model and then putting it in the hands of Dr. Olson and Dr. Frost to implement? Or do we want to be more specific, knowing that being more specific is really setting a precedent for now Dr. Olson's got to come back to us every time and say, all right, I want to add 4th through 8th grade in here. Boom, we've got to come back to a motion. I want to go Down syndrome next time. We've got to add a motion. We've got to get board approval at every step. I personally think that sets a pretty tough precedent for the administration, because if we're going to get into the quote unquote weeds operationally on this one, then that sounds to me like Dr. Lopez better start bringing a whole bunch of approvals to the board every time we want to implement a new reading program or a new math program or, new CFC or whatever it is. So I've got concerns just about the precedent that sets, but I'm good either way if the board wants to go with some type of motion tonight.
Eric, I wonder if you might help kind of just hearing your perspective on what was the idea on bringing this to the board. Can you kind of talk through that a little bit?
Yes. So the idea of bringing this to the board is really that we wanted to get started, and that we wanted to get started with a program. I think that if for every little piece of that program we need to keep revisiting back to the board, I agree with Rick. I feel like that's starting to take too much. Probably we would not be presenting it in the way and, if everything that had not happened a few years ago. So I think because of everything that happened, as was said earlier, I think as Larry said, we were pulled into the weeds, then as we've kind of stayed here. And so I think that the idea was, can we start climbing out of the weeds? But I wasn't sure how far the board wanted to go with that. And, obviously, as Rick said earlier, we're more than happy to do with whatever the board wants. Back to Rebecca's question, if I were to bring something tonight just for consensus and you were against it, while technically I have authority to move forward, I would not move forward because I don't have your consensus. And I think it was important for Leanne and me throughout this whole process, what was the consensus of the principals? What was the consensus of PT3? What was the consensus of the special ed advisory group? Each of those groups, we wanted to get those consensus as we move forward. The board is the last stop before we can go ahead and start putting those things into motion. Does that help somewhat?
Actually, Dr. Olson, I think you used the word that I was looking for earlier and I just couldn't get it out. I like the idea of asking us for consensus, and I like the idea as opposed to us voting. And I also like the idea that somehow, maybe somewhere we can just request of you that when it comes to, so that it doesn't get lost in the future, when it comes to special ed issues, that we would like it if you would ask us for our consensus and take our consensus prior to making any final decisions. So that way, if you do choose to move forward without getting our consensus, we can always address that when we're looking to renew you. Right. That way we can maintain that level of checks and balances, yet we're still not, we kind of get off the dance floor, like you said, Rick. So, I mean, there might be a good compromise here that would work, where we can still maintain our involvement, which is what we failed on prior to you being here, but yet still not be the ones making these administrative decisions.
I also, we asked some time ago to be kept up to date on how we were moving on the audit and the direction we were taking to correct the shortcomings on the audit. So that will drive, everyone agreed to that, and that will drive Dr. Olson, Dr. Frost into bringing those things to us that need a consensus of opinion because of the audit.
I just noticed at the bottom of my screen on Zoom that we had a live question pop up. I have it up on my screen. I'm happy to read it.
Yeah, I was just checking with MJ to make sure we're good to read that online.
Yeah, so it says, it's from a Yahoo email address. This has been a collaboration between parents, staff, administration, and the board in countless conversations and subcommittee discussions at PT3. Everyone was open to give their opinions. As being a staff member in special education for 22 years in District 64, I have seen the many changes of SPED, and the changes that occurred when we eliminated programs caused several structural changes in SPED. We need to continue with programs that are going to propel our students with special needs where they can reach their amazing potentials.
On that correction is that It's not several structural changes, but she wrote severe structural changes.
Oh, yeah, you're right. That's my COVID-19 not leaving the house brain. Sorry about that.
I guess to follow up with what Tom said, and I think what Grant had written in as a public comment, have we talked about, I think there's been a push from the community. How do we stay involved in the special education program so we're not caught off guard, like Rick had said, when the board was a few years ago. So when do we see like data shared about this program? I'm just trying to see like, when are we going to keep up with how is this going?
Yeah, and we can certainly set up, presentations for next year, whether they're quarterly or trimester or something, to talk about the progress of the program, what's going on. And yeah, I would think the board would be very much interested to hear about those pieces, surveying the parents in the program, those kinds of things as we go forward.
And that was one of the slides in the presentation last week too.
And I don't think any of us are necessarily suggesting by saying we vote or not vote on this that we don't want to hear about special ed anymore. That's not all we're saying. In fact, Dr. Frost, I'm sure this isn't going to come as a surprise, but you're still going to need to give your regular presentations to the board, and I'm sure the board still wants to hear regularly from PT3 as we've been doing. And I think to Larry's point earlier, we're going to be pushing to continue to make sure that we're addressing the issues that were in that audit. That's not going to stop here. The question is procedurally how we do that. Whether we do it the way what we've been doing for the last, whatever we want to say, 12 months now, or whether we want to start doing it by, edict from the board, where we're putting motions into place at each meeting and saying, all right, you're now approved to do this. Now you're approved to do that. Those are different things. And I think, Tom, to your point, I completely agree. I would hope, and I think Eric's probably heard that pretty strongly from everybody tonight, that any of these big topics continue to need to come to the board as sort of the last, focus group or that you're talking to in this whole thing to get consensus from. But also, I was thinking about, we had conversations a couple of meetings ago about, training staff in Wilson, and how many we were going to do, and which that's not a board decision as to whether or not we do that. That's Leanne's decision and Eric's decision. We might say we think it's a good idea to have that as a policy, but beyond that, the implementation of that's up to the superintendent and the director of student services. So Tom, my only point in bringing that up is I don't want to necessarily set the stage for Eric to feel that he's got to come to us with every like Wilson type question for the board, but certainly where we're changing, major things in the program, I would expect that the board's going to be asked for its consensus in that. And as Eric said, he has the authority to do it whether we give him consensus or not, theoretically, I guess, unless we vote no on it. But, to his character, he's not going to do it if the board doesn't have consensus on this.
So Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to these types of programs, at some point, we're going to have to approve a budget of some sort if the money is going to be beyond what we've allocated for these. So we do still have a so-called veto power, yep, should it be necessary. And then at that point, we can trigger a request or a demand of our administration to bring us more information on a certain issue, whether it's SPED or something else. And at the same time, we can, as a board, on a issue by issue, if we decide in the future there is an issue that is that we all feel collectively deserve or requires us to actually vote on, because one, it's going to be an exorbitant amount of money, or whatever, we can always go back to requesting that we put it on the agenda for a vote.
Yep. So anyone else have thoughts? I mean, I guess we need to get consensus, no pun intended here, for whether or not we want to take a vote. And then if we decide to take a vote, then we have to start talking the wording of the motion. If there's consensus that we're not going to take a vote, then I think we need to tell Eric whether he has consensus for this program.
Before you,
I'm sorry?
Before you do that, I just want to interrupt for a second. The last comment that Rick read was from Jenny Belmonte at Carpenter.
Okay,
Just
I
so that
didn't
it's
want to
clear.
say that because I didn't want to give away her.
She then followed up with, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I have an additional public comment, if you want me to read it, from Lorena Fisher. A 22-year staff member just shared publicly that severe structural changes were made to the SPED program. A third-party audit confirmed it. Many parents have brought issues to the board. Will the board please consider forming a task force that the main purpose / focus is to launch and implement an overall SPED program quickly versus what the current timeline is? That's the end of the comment.
Okay, I'm obviously, if anybody wants to suggest that to administration, I guess we can. My question is, how is PT3 different than what that comment, just suggested?
I guess
whether PT3 isn't already doing that.
The question I would have is this something that we already have addressed when we did our decisions on when we had a SPED board or a SPED committee, and then we got rid of the SPED committee and we put it in the hands of PT3, but then we injected a board member to go to the PT3 meetings so that they can report back to us. And then we're moving forward with that process that I think we got some pretty good support from a lot of the community. Am I reading the last commenter's question correctly? Are they asking us now to revert back to something different and start that process all over again and see whether we need to be, or are we still good with the PT3 board member attendance as the process to move this forward? And we can take her question and present it to PT3 or forward it over to PT3 so they can maybe work quicker on getting to a solution for a district-wide goal like she's asking for.
Dr. Olson, Dr. Frost, either of you, a thought on that?
I think this question seems like it's an administrative question. If there's a different committee or task force wants to be formed, it doesn't seem like it's a board issue. So I think, Dr. Frost and Dr. Olson can take that feedback and proceed.
I will read the comment in response to your question, I think, Tom. PT3 meets once a month and has no decision-making power. A task force that has a 6-month timeline to bring a solution is the response from Mrs. Fisher.
Yeah, I guess I would just say I'm not sure what would be different. So I guess if I'm hearing right, the only thing different would be that they want decision power. And I just don't know that, if we're talking about dance floor, so, now we have even more people on the dance floor making decisions. I don't think we would move in that direction, and I don't think school districts, go that way. The reason we have committees is committees help to form what the presentation is. As Leanne shared, the way we were talking in September to the way we were talking when we presented to the board last week changed over time. And that had to do a lot with the influence of what we heard from the different groups. So I'm, and I guess I'm a little confused because I'm also hearing, why are we not moving faster? But then it's also asking us to stop. So I'm not so sure about that.
All right, so if we were sitting in a horseshoe right now, I'd start at one end of the table and just go around the horn, but we're not. I'm looking at the Brady Bunch matrix up on my screen here. So I'm just gonna start going in order as I see it there, but I'd like to hear from each board member on whether or not they would, again, just what we're talking about now is whether or not they want to take some type of a vote, a formal vote on this tonight, or whether they would rather just give consensus one way or the other to Dr. Olson and Dr. Frost on this. So Larry, I'm going to start with you.
I don't believe it. We should vote. I believe in a consensus of opinion.
Okay. Carol?
I think we should vote. I do know the administration's been waiting for direction, and let's say we do have a consensus, and then let's say in the future, the administration wants to hire X number of people. If we actually had a vote on this, approving it, then it might make it more likely that they can proceed and have the comfort that we will approve the hiring of whoever they need to staff that extra room. And then I think we discussed maybe a year ago about trying to move away from just, I mean, I think before the board used to do that as a matter of course and just go around the horseshoe and seek a consensus, but I thought, I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but we were going to try to move away from that sort of thing, and just, you know, get some substantive work done. So, I mean, I think it is good. It's a positive that we're actually finally doing something and moving forward. If we were to vote, then maybe we wouldn't want it to be as specific as, you know, we're voting to approve this, what is it called, the SLC for K through 3. What if we just said, you know, approving the SLC as presented, you know, at the April 20th and April 27th meeting, and if you want to say, you know, from K through 8, I guess it just depends on how everybody feels, but I'd be in favor of, you know, actually having a motion and voting on it.
Okay, Rebecca?
I would also like to have a motion. I just feel like the SPED parents, this audit was 2 years ago, and I'm so glad that the administration is moving forward because it does feel like everything has just stopped worldwide. So I'm glad that this didn't. But I just want to give that extra show of support that we are, even though this is a small piece of it, moving forward on it.
Tom?
I think with the commitment from Dr. Olson and from Leanne to continue to keep us apprised and come to us for these sort of consensus, I feel that a consensus or a vote is still going to give them the same confidence. They'll know, you know, if we vote yes, then they'll know to move forward with the project and put together spendings and move on. And with a consensus, they'll also feel that same level of confidence that the board has in them. So I don't believe that a consensus or a vote is going to give them anything different. I do feel that by not voting and doing a consensus instead, it allows us to maintain that division that is necessary between boards and administration. When money is needed to make this stuff happen, they still have to come back to us for that. And you know, it'll keep us, we still have a level of protection on our as a board to be able to inject ourselves if we ever needed to. So my vote would be today to go with a consensus and not a vote, and just have Dr. Olson and Dr. Leanne give us, you know, a renewed commitment that they will continue to come to us with these pet issues for these consensuses.
Denise?
You know, as Rick stated earlier, I'm a fan of the balcony and I try to stay off the dance floor. I'm not a great dancer, but I think for me, and I think Rick, you hit it on the head. Sometimes we disagree, but I totally agree with you on this one. You said that, you know, I don't want every step of this coming for board approval. And I think you made such a solid point there. To me, this is I vote for a consent vote for, I'd like to see a consensus. And the reason why it almost for me represents a paradigm shift for the board in District 64. We are trusting Dr. Olson and Dr. Frost to execute this program, to put it into operationally. The board's informed. We're going to continue to be informed. We're going to continue to be seeing what's happening with our special education community. But it's in their hands. That's what we hired them for. So I guess, and so that's my opinion. Rebecca, as a follow-up, you'd like to see a vote. Carol kind of talked about a way she'd like to see the motion reframed a little bit. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know that I could do it on the fly right now. I think that the way that it's written is a little mushy. And so I don't know, Carol, this is more your department. Did you have a rewrite?
the legal term of art, mushy. We have generally some possibilities, but you know, it just depends on what the board wants to do here. You know, it sounds like you're moving away from the more specific. So one version would have had, you know, K through 8 or K through 3. So it sounds like we would not be doing that. It sounds like we would be doing a version, you know, describing the specific programs, and possibly, I know one idea that we mentioned was describing who would need to be hired, but it sounds like we're moving away from that. So it sounds like the board, if we were to vote, would not even want that in the motion. I'd say, I guess, something more specific than how it's drafted right now, because right now it just says that we're approving the program for expanding the continuum of services as presented at the April 20th meeting. So my only concern was that there was, you know, it was a long video and there were lots of, you know, permutations in that video and lots of talk about, you know, the expansion of this program in the future. So what exactly were we going to be approving? But I mean, I guess what we, let's see, the gist of what we would have drafted was something a little more specific about what the program is called and then the grades.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, to name it in the motion.
So Fred, before I get to you, well, Denise, did you have any other questions for Rebecca on that? Okay. Fred, before I get to you and your thoughts, I just, I'm trying to think through, I guess that's, when we talked earlier about the type of motion, we've gotten it to a point, at least it sounds to me like we're all kind of in agreement that to the extent we were going to vote, it was going to need to be a mushy one at that, and maybe even mushier than it's currently drafted, in order to give the administration the leeway so as not to come back to us or feel like they have to come back to us each time, you know, to go this direction or to go that direction. And again, my example before of, are we approving a model that is not just specific to the autism spectrum, but could be taken across a variety of different things? Or are we only approving a model tonight specifically for the autism spectrum? You know, I guess the way I viewed it, and I might be wrong about this, is I viewed it as this is the starting point of where they want to go with this. They're going to start here. They're going to take that same model then and apply it in different areas and in different buildings and with different staff. And so, you know, so I go back to then, so what does that mean? Where, you know, if we go to a super mushy motion, why? Like, so at the end of the day, so why are we doing that? So that the board can say they voted? Like, are we going to hold ourselves accountable then for that vote if it goes sideways, or are we going to hold Eric accountable for that if it goes sideways? I don't know what we're accomplishing necessarily by taking that vote in this particular case. It being as mushy as it is. That's my thought. Anyway, I'll shut up. And Fred, why don't you talk about your thoughts on it?
Sure. You know, it's taken us a very long time to get to this point where we're going to start implementing programs to change the poor history we've had with special ed. You know, we've brought an experienced special ed director doing internal audit. We've done the external audit. You know, we've had changes from top to bottom. My vote, I guess, my preference would be to do a consensus. I appreciate that the administration has come to us with the presentation for that they gave us last week and today. I think it's entirely appropriate that they consult with us. But my concern about taking a vote is now we are somehow possibly tying their hands from being able to do some of the things they need to do to implement that vision. And I think that's entirely in Dr. Olson's hands and Dr. Frost's hands. And I don't want to interfere with that because I am not a special ed expert. That this is why we brought them both on board to lead that change, and this is the start. We're not going to stop here. We're going to continue to look at this program. We're going to continue to collaborate with parents. We're going to look at other grades, and I just don't think a vote would be appropriate tonight.
Okay, so it sounds like we have consensus to go consensus for this. So with that,
You want me just to go around and have, I mean, we don't have a motion, but I could just at least do the roll. So we, or I mean, are you comfortable with what everyone said so that it sounds like we do have a consensus?
yeah, well, I heard 5 people say consensus and 2 people say vote. Because I don't think we can go take a roll because that's.
No, it wouldn't be a roll, but just to see if everyone is on board with, you know, I guess formalize the consensus if you want.
Oh yeah, no. So that's that's where I was going to go next. Was
Yeah.
then now go around the horn and ask specifically of the program that's been presented. Do we have consensus from the board on the program presented? Is there anything that? Is there anyone? I guess maybe we can start off this way. Is there anyone who does not approve of the program as being presented? And if so, do you want to voice what those concerns are? Or if you want to see anything necessarily changed from your perspective as you give consensus or not. So why don't we start same order again. Larry, you're up on my top right hand side of my screen.
Yeah, it's like I said the last board meeting that I'm 100% for it, and I applaud all the players. I specifically want to applaud the PT3 group. They've played a big part in this, in helping us move this thing along. You know, and as you know, Rick, it's been a 4-year or 3-year kind of uphill climb, but I'm really starting to feel good about where we're going. So thank you, Dr. Frost. Thank you, Dr. Olson, and thank you, PT3.
Great. Carol?
I'm in favor of this program. I think it's a good start. Sounds like a lot of thought has been put into it. I just want, you know, these conversations to continue. One thing Dr. Frost mentioned was using the services of Have Dreams for training. I know in the SPED community for years, people have wondered, well, why aren't we taking advantage of, you know, this sort of thing that's around? So it's good that it's happening now. I think we should also continue to look to all the various experts in all the surrounding suburbs and I mean, even nationally if possible, just to see if we can keep improving and moving forward.
Yep. Rebecca?
Yeah, I'm in favor of this. And I also want to thank everyone who gave their time to PT3. That was a long time to stay after work all those months. And I'm glad that we're finally off to the races to make some good changes.
Tom?
If we were voting, I would have voted yes. Since this is a consensus, I'm giving my support for the program. I would ask that if you see that, if Leanne, you see that there's a high interest and there's a lot more people or students that are going to be entering the program, that you put some weight into the one commenter's recommendation that if you're going to possibly add more and you can move it to another school that feeds another one of the middle schools, I think that's a great recommendation. And then when we do move to programs in the middle schools, to have one at each of them, since there's only 2, I think would be a really good, not compromise, but I think would be a really good step towards getting what this district needs without actually having to get to the every school model. So I thought that was a really good recommendation by the commenter, and I just want you to keep that in mind if we do grow to the point where it's needed.
Denise?
As I said, yes, I'm in support. And I really appreciate, you know, as an educator, there's the process and the product. I appreciate District 64's process in developing this program. It was reflective, it was strategic, it was collaborative, it responsive to feedback. I happen to be the board member at the PT3 meeting when this was presented. And there was such a conversational response to feedback, and the presentation looked different than what we saw because Dr. Frost and Dr. Olson were responsive to that feedback. So I think there's been so many perspectives being considered. So consensus from me as well.
Fred?
I support the program as presented. I want to continue getting data that demonstrates how it's doing. I want to continue to hear from PT3 or whatever organization we put together that consists of parents and the teachers involved in this program to hear how it's doing. But I support where we're headed.
Great. Yeah, I do too. I think one of the slides, Leanne, that you presented earlier struck me both this week and last. I think it was, trying to remember exactly what the question was, but it was in one of the positives, and it was one of the bars that went all the way out to the right, and it was on the communication. And I just think back to 3 years ago that I don't think there was enough paper on the other direction on the left side that line could have gone, you know, to Des Plaines, frankly, in the lack of communication that was out there. And so to me, that was just such a sea change to see what you and your team and Eric on your end as well too on creating that environment. And I know the other thing that was talked about a lot prior, Eric, to you coming on board, and you as well, Leanne, was just that trust had been lost. We were hearing that from parents all the time, that trust was lost. And I think, well, I can't underscore enough, I think, Eric, you said this, that this is, you know, step one in many steps that are going to be coming. It's a big step, but it's a step nonetheless. It's not like this isn't, okay, we're done, you know, board's done hearing about special ed, we can move on to something else now. This is part one of a long process, but it was a long time coming. So I applaud you both and the team and PT3 for everything that you guys have done to get us where we are today. So, all right. So no vote, consensus. There we go.
Thanks to the board.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Any other thoughts on that before we wrap up that agenda item for tonight? All right, and Leanne, you heard it. You're not off the hook. You get to keep giving us presentations. So the board was pretty clear about that.
Looking forward to it.
Good. And we do have on the schedule, I know PT3's, you know, kind of in flux right now because of COVID, but is PT3 going to start meeting again by Zoom or doing something else, or what's the plan?
I actually have that on an agenda item for Dr. Olson and I tomorrow.
Okay. So I would presume then that one of the board members, we can keep doing what we're doing and have a board member attend, just we'll do it by Zoom instead of in person. Great.
Yeah, it's my turn.
Yep. Awesome. All right, Larry, you're up. Okay. Any new business from the board tonight?
I have a question, and Dr. Olson, I don't mean to put you on the spot. I don't need an answer right away. But I was wondering if during economic downturns, if we get more students because people jump in from the privates?
You're asking me if that's a possibility?
I just wondered, like, that seems anecdotally like it might be true, but I have absolutely no idea if there's any data that would show you if that happened last time. We're surrounded by enough private schools that I wondered if we'll get a bump enough that we might break some bubbles if kids transfer into the public school.
And when you said last time, you mean like?
Oh, I meant 2008, like the last.
Okay, that's what I thought.
November.
I haven't looked at that data. I think it's something we can look at and see. I think it's going to be pretty hard to predict.
Yeah.
I think we'll get our normal, you know, after kindergarten when we usually see a bump up in first graders because some people choose to do the full day kindergarten elsewhere. I imagine those things would still be the same, but you're right. We are going to probably have to watch out for increases.
I just wondered. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, Rebecca, that was great. That was a great comment because it's we don't want to be caught off guard by it. So now we're not. Now, you know, administration will take a look at it and we'll be ready.
And I was going to say, I think we started asking the opposite question of Luann at our last meeting about on the foreclosure side, that there's a hard number you can look at as to how many homes were foreclosed on in 08, which went the opposite direction. Then kids were moving out of the district, you know, potentially where the family's gone, they've moved out of town and there's nobody in the house. So where there were 2.3 kids in that home, now there's 0, you know, going into the district. So it would be worthwhile for Luann maybe to just look back at that data from 08, 09 and see what we can glean from it.
Okay.
For both, you know, both the parochial private, you know, coming in and the foreclosure going out. All right, any other new business?
Just not new business. We talked about it last board meeting. I guess we're still working on the plan to return the hot lunch money and get the kids in to clean out their lockers and collecting Chromebooks, and that's coming along.
Correct. Yes. And so this week we've started with with staff going in and wrapping up the rooms and then also packing up the student materials. So because we are only letting staff in limited amounts, it's going to take us a few weeks to get all the staff through the buildings. And then once we do that, then we're going to arrange for the student pickup piece. Parents can now get refunds for the school lunch. Yes.
Are we focusing on Washington first for getting students and staff out?
Yeah, we are, because they would very much like to start construction earlier, if possible. I mean, there's so many steps we need to do, but yes, we are moving out Washington. Washington's also a little more unique because there are certain teachers that have to pack up their entire classroom due to construction needs. And so, that's not happening at other buildings like it is at Washington, but it is a limited amount of people.
Okay, anything else from the board? If not, we'll have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Tom's got the motion, Fred's got the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we will see everybody in a few weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice meeting, guys. Celebratory. Okay.
Yes.